Hi, I'm Atheist Fat Cat, and today I will be interviewing Dr. Mary Neal, who claims to have had an out-of-body experience after a serious kayaking accident, and who is also the author of the book, To Heaven and Back. She joins us now. Dr. Mary Neal, thank you for speaking with us. Now, let's just jump right into it. Could you tell us how all of this started? Tell us about the accident.
Well, I was submerged and the force of the water had me absolutely pinned to the front deck of the boat. And so I was not able to push myself out of the boat or pull the spray skirt off and exit the boat. And I tried a number of times before it became clear that I wasn't going to be able to exit the boat on my own. And I was far enough away from the shore of the river that I didn't think anyone was going to be pulling me out. And at that time, I gave my life over to God and truly and sincerely asked that God's will be done.
So you assume that no one would be able to pull you out, even though that's exactly what happened, and you gave up. You stopped fighting, you stopped thinking about ways to survive, and you intentionally put an end to all willpower in staying alive, and basically said that, well, if it's the will of the gods that I be dead, then I be dead. Okay, so what happened after you gave in and gave up your willpower to stay alive?
At that moment, everything changed. I was very calm and peaceful and felt great. And I had this very physical sense of being held and comforted and reassured that everything would be fine. My husband and my children would be fine, regardless of whether I lived or died.
Oh, your husband and children would be fine, whether you lived or died. So who cares, right? Do you not realize that your children and husband would have been devastated by your death? They would have been emotionally scarred for the rest of their lives. I don't know if you know this or not, but growing up with a dead mom tends to be emotionally crippling. So I can only assume that when you say the word fine, you are referring to their health. Now, I understand that at this point of your story, the facts of reality just sort of fall off a cliff. Now, your book, in your book, you talk about how your soul was being raised up from the water, and you encountered 15 or 20 spirits waiting for you. Tell us about that.
It was fantastic. These were people, spirits, souls. I'm not quite sure what to call them. All the words sound a little goofy.
The reason why the term spirit, soul, or leprechauns sounds goofy is because when people mention them, they're usually just full of hot air. They have no evidence, no accountability, no critical thinking, just random mentions of, oh, I saw an angel, and I saw a unicorn, and an alien. That's why these terms sound goofy. Okay, so what happened next in these, with these spirits or souls, as you put it?
They were people that I had known for an eternity, and they had known me for an eternity, and we were so happy to see each other.
An eternity. You have known them for an eternity. How can you know anyone for an infinite amount of time? I mean, we do know that the universe is at least 13 billion years old, so at a bare minimum, you would have to have known them for at least 13 billion years. And the fact that you don't know whether it's 15 or 20 of them kind of tells me a lot. Look, if I had known 20 people for 20 years, then I would be able to tell you all about them, including how many of them there were. Okay. So what happened next in your story? Well, about the spirits and souls. Keep going with those. That's fun.
They were clearly there to help me go down this path and protect me. And it was wonderful. They were exploding with God's love and grace and they took me down this path that was so beautiful that I have really no words to describe it. And time and space had a different sense, and so I could rejoice with them. Simultaneously, I could look back at the riverbank and see my body being pulled to the shore and seeing CPR being started. And I looked back on my body and sort of felt fondly toward it and thought, gee, you served me well. And it was then that I truly realized that I must actually be dead.
If you realized that you were truly dead, then why the fuck would you be walking away from your body? I mean, you just told me they were doing CPR on your body, so there's still a chance. After all, you're here alive talking to me, so I'd say there's a pretty damn good chance of recovery. It's starting to sound like you didn't want to go back to your life. So, did you want to go back to your life, which also contains your loving husband and children?
No. And I had all the reasons to return. I had a great life. I had a great job. I had a great husband. My children are wonderful, and I loved them more than I could ever imagine loving something on earth. But the love that I felt for them in comparison to God's love that was absolutely flowing through everything was just pale in comparison.
Oh, so you love this magical creature more than you love your husband and more than you love your own children. You intentionally chose to leave your own children behind, all for the emotional experience you felt from your God. Well, you must be a pretty selfish individual to abandon your own family, all because you get a greater intensity of love from someone else. So, you were walking away from your body and down this path. What happened next?
At a certain point, one of the people or the spirits told me that it wasn't my time and that I had more work to do on earth and that I had to go back to my body. Then they took me back down the path, and literally I sat down in my body.
So you and the spirits or ghosts all just did this about face and headed right back down the path you were already on? What was the point of walking down the path in the first place? Seems like a big waste of time to me. It also sounds like these ghost people don't even know what the fuck they're doing. Now, what would you say to those people who think that this might be the result of a dying brain, as opposed to a magical journey?
Where medicine ends, God begins. That's the real answer. Because this was not a dream or a hallucination, and it wasn't the result of a dying brain.
Where medicine ends, God begins. And what about all the decent moral human beings who have died horrible and painful deaths throughout all of human history? You do realize that children die from health issues like all the time. And the only thing that comes close to preventing this is our advancements in medical science. And how do you know that it wasn't the result of a dying brain? What could possibly make you dismiss this idea?
This was more real than anything experienced here on earth.
So you know that this wasn't the result of a dying brain because your experience was very realistic. Well, you know what's not realistic? Your story. Look, I've had a very vivid dream where I was convinced that it was reality. And then I woke up in my bed. And either it was just a vivid dream, or I was actually flying around all on my own without even realizing the fact that I was violating the laws of physics. And then somehow I was instantly in my bed, and it felt like I was just sleeping. Now, since I'm a rational human being, I was able to understand which of these two scenarios matched up with the reality that I know to exist, even though I never experienced such a realistic dream before. Now, to say that this was realistic, therefore it couldn't be the result of a dying brain, is completely absurd. Because while reality does exist, everything that we experience as reality is a recreation from the information that we interpret from our senses. Okay, so after CPR was done, and the humans brought you back to life, then tell me about your experience in the hospital.
I was in the hospital for 5 or 6 weeks. I absolutely felt like I was neither here nor there. I then again felt myself back in heaven and God's world. I was in this incredible field. Again, it was the same experience of intensity, but I was having this conversation with Jesus.
So later on in the hospital, you felt like you were neither here nor there. I'm guessing that you were just passing in and out of consciousness due to the drugs that the hospital had you on. And you say that during one of these, I'm going to call it a blackout, you suddenly found yourself in a field talking to Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. Okay, so what did you and Jesus Christ talk about?
We talked more about reasons that I'd been sent back. It had to do with my husband's health. So when a couple of our friends died from unexpected causes, I then pushed my husband to have his heart checked. And it was on this heart scan that they ended up finding this lung lesion that was malignant. Had it not been found, he probably wouldn't be here.
Okay, you just told me earlier that your husband would be fine if you died, all right? Look, this story of yours is really starting to contradict itself. So I'm going to have to put this whole goddamn thing in perspective. All right, you were in an accident, and then your ghost-like existence hovered up from the water where you encountered 15 or 20 souls that you've known for an eternity. And somehow you knew that your children and husband would be fine, whether or not you lived or died. Even though you just told me that your husband would probably not be alive if you weren't here to push him to have his heart checked. And when you were hanging out with these spirit folk, you intentionally chose to leave your husband and children behind because you loved your God more than your own damn family. And because you are so selfish, you chose to go wherever you experienced the greater intensity of love. And so you and the ghost people walked down this path just to turn right the fuck around and head right back to your body. Later on in the hospital, as you were fading in and out of consciousness, you had an encounter with Jesus Christ, who told you that the whole reason he was there was to tell you that your husband's health was in decline. And after you did nothing about it, I guess your loving God struck down a couple of your friends just so you could get another message that your husband's health was in decline. And then you pushed him to have his heart checked. Wow. Well, just how important was your husband's life anyways? I mean, you were brought back to life, you were visited by Jesus Christ, and a couple of your friends died, all for the purpose of saving your husband's life, even though God could have just fixed his health with a single thought, or a snap of the finger, or whatever. Or just, I guess, prevented the whole damn thing from occurring in the first place. You know, I'm starting to think that deep down, you don't actually believe any of this crap. And I think I can prove it. You said earlier that you intentionally did not want to go back to your family because the love that you felt for your family was pale in comparison to your God's love. So, now that you have had time to reflect, would you in any way hasten your life in order to go back to God's love quicker?
Oh, absolutely not. I wouldn't hasten it, but I am looking forward to going back when it's the right time.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And what do you mean when it's the right time? You told me earlier that the whole reason they brought you back to life was so that you could save the life of your husband. And now that you have done that, well, I guess that it is the right time. And now your life is fair game. Now, if you could tell me something that you've learned from all of this, then what would that be?
I would tell you that there's no such thing as something that's bad. As one very quick example, you called this a horrific accident. I look at it with incredible gratitude and joy. And we may not understand how a, quote, bad thing transitions into a beautiful thing. But I think when you truly have trust that that beauty exists, we can look, and it's unfortunately always retrospectively, but we can almost always look back at something and see all of the incredibly positive and beautiful things that have come out of something that would originally be called tragic.
By saying that there's no such thing as something that is bad, just seems like a giant middle finger to anyone who's ever been kidnapped, tortured, raped, enslaved, murdered. And the example that you give on why there's no such thing as something that is bad is the fact that you were in an accident and made a full recovery. You're not missing any limbs. You're not paralyzed. No, you made a full recovery. And you believe that your husband's life was saved because of this accident. And you think that this is evidence that there is no such thing as something that is bad? So, throughout all of human history, nothing bad has ever happened. Just look at the Titanic and all the lives that were lost that day. If it wasn't for that horrific accident, then we never would have had the movie Titanic. And that movie was definitely okay. So thank God 1,517 people died so that we could have this okay movie. And what about 9/11? You're not really going to make the argument that incredible and wonderful, beautiful things have happened because of 9/11? Now, I don't believe any of this bullshit, but I'm just using your logic. The idea that there's no such thing as something that is bad because later on, down the road, something great and wonderful will happen because of the original tragedy. Look, I'm going to make this very simple for you. If one person dies in order to save the lives of two people, then while it is a good thing that the two people were saved, it's still a bad thing that the one person had to die in order to save the other two. Oh, wow. Look at the time. This interview has gone on far longer than I anticipated. So thank you, Dr. Mary Neal, for joining us, but we really need to move on to our next guest, who is a psychologist, and she goes by the name of Wendy Walsh, who is here to tell us about atheism and theism. So, take it away, Wendy.
Most studies on survivors show that the atheists die first, because if you don't believe in something supernatural, how can you imagine that you yourself have supernatural abilities enough to survive?
Holy shit! We have supernatural abilities? Why didn't anybody tell me this? Oh, okay, I gotta check this out. Supernatural abilities, activate! Oh shit. Oh, that's cool. Wow. That's amazing. So, I guess that if you just believe in something enough, then the universal laws that govern all of reality will just be put on hold. All for your convenience. And what was that about that you said about atheists die first? I just did an interview with a lady who said that she gave up the willpower to live because of her belief in magic. Huh. Look, why don't you just tell me what you think about traditional religions?
traditional religions tend to fall away as people become more educated, and science looks at some of the supernatural things in the writings and teachings of religion, says, well, science can disprove that. But that doesn't mean that science has all the answers for everything.
Yes, you are correct when you say that scientists do not have every answer to every conceivable question. Scientists do not know every single thing about every single thing. I mean, obviously, right? But that doesn't mean that you should reject the information that we've already learned through science, and that doesn't mean that your religious leaders know any goddamn thing about the world. Look, just do me a favor and just tell me something that's based on reality.
Religions fighting religions, and that's not good.
Well, that's some good insight. But it looks like that's about all the time we have for today, so I would like to thank Dr. Mary Neal and Wendy Walsh for joining us, and that's all we have for today, so superpower!